this was a question for those who weren't in the room earlier, that was asked to me via email about a plan and maybe how it might be a good idea to sort of start to come up with one. Actually, it was more about finding a plan for Brent, and the fact that I didn't have a strict plan that you would find on the Owners Club for one, meant that I suggested maybe we have a look to how to start coming about finding a plan and identifying the times that you want to trade a particular product. And therefore, if you find things that you would like to trade that there isn't a plan for, you can use the same ideas to then go on and use create your own plan. Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to find the data, and this is potentially an issue depending on what platform you have. So you need to be able to export a certain amount of data. This is the way I do it anyway. In TradeStation you definitely can. NinjaTrader depends on how much data, how far back you can get. You might find that you get a reasonable amount. I don't know, you'll have to see what you can get. But anyway, so what I've done here is I've exported a load of Brent data from my trade platform, from my data feed. And you can see basically I've just got a 15-minute Brent data, so the open, the high, the low. Last is just close. I'm just going to insert a column here, and it's just going to be range. So I want to do equals high minus low, and we can get the range. And then all I want to do here now is create a very simple pivot table. All I need to do is go to the Insert tab and then Pivot Table, select the pivot table range. I'm not actually bothered about the ticker. Hit enter, and then hit OK, and I've got various different fields, and what I want to do is I want to create a volume and range by time. So we want to have the rows as time here, and we want to have values as volume and range. And what we want to do is we want to put, you can put the max and the min, or any mathematical formula based on that if you want, but I think it's just easy enough just to put the average of the range and the average of the volume. So simply at this point, what we've got for Brent is we've got 15 minutes, average range and volume. And to make it really clear, really simple thing that you can do here is you can select your data. You need to do a column at a time, because otherwise it will be using the max and the min values for all that you select. So this is why I've not selected both columns at the same time. So you just go into conditional formatting, and I'm just going to do a in fact I'll do a color scale, and I'm going to do blue. Actually, let me do a heat map one. Green, yellow and red 3-color scale for that. And we're going to have to change it because it's obviously not ideal, but I'm going to just do the same for the volume. And I'm going to go to manage rules, and I'm just going to edit this so you can see it's C2 C96, this rule. So first of all, I'm just going to make it a bit more intense in color. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the midpoint a number, and I think what I'm going to do is make the midpoint, say, 500. See how that comes out. Yeah, that's pretty good. That red might be a bit intense actually, so and I'm going to do the same with this one here as well, and I'm going to make the midpoint probably 20, maybe not 20, maybe like 15. So 0.15. And basically this is kind of guesstimate, but this is not too bad. It's interesting. You can see there at the 615 bar, there's an extra bit of range and volume that comes in. This is Eastern time, by the way. But what you get by doing this is you get a bit of an overview of where the volume and the range comes in. So the range does start to come in a little bit before the volume comes in, but you can see that clearly the volume comes in, and this is 3 to 3:15. So 3:15 means starting at 3, ending at 3:15, and that's 8 o'clock in the morning. So 8 a.m. you can see the volumes clearly starts to pick up, dips a little bit into 12 o'clock, 7 a.m. so 11:45 until 12, and it starts to pick up, and it really then picks up at 1:30, which is the when frequently you have the US numbers, so extra 700 on average on that 15-minute, so pretty hefty increase in terms of percentage, and then it gets really intense up until the 11:30, which is 4:30 UK time, and then it drops off a bit and has a bit of a pickup back into the pit close, I think that would be, at 7:30, and then it just really drops off, and then you do get this, apparently this increase. That could be something technical, I don't know, but we won't worry about that too much. I think and just focus on when the volumes and the ranges come in. So if you want to trade this in the morning, you're looking at starting at 8 a.m. You're probably looking at going, so let's just write in conclusions. So EU So we're starting at 8 AM and we're ending, well, probably it really starts to drop off around here, so maybe 10:30, something like that. And remember, you might have to tweak this as you go along. You might have to change this a bit, but certainly on average it tends to drop off after 10:30. So let's just put in the conclusion, put 10:30 AM PST, which is obviously GMT when the clocks change again. And in the US, we're really talking about starting after 1:30, and you could probably trade from 1:30 until 2:30, until 7:30, really in the afternoon. I mean, it's pretty decent volume and range all the way through. There's a bit of a dip over lunchtime, but relative to the UK EU session, it's not too bad. So you could say trade 1:30 PM till 7:30 PM. Could say like it's probably there, maybe say 5:30 until 6:30, a bit of a lunchtime lull. Something like that. And you'll notice that I'm not being highly specific. Yeah, that's right, 2:30 Eastern is crude NYMEX pit close, so that's a pretty obvious time, isn't it? And you get that extra 15 minutes that there's still a reasonable amount of volume, and then it starts to really rapidly drop off after that. So that's a broad overview. Now what you could do as well is you could just add another level here, and you could say, okay, well, I'm going to insert a column there, and I'm going to put weekday. And all you have to do is put equals weekday, and then you just do that, and you format the cells, and you can do custom, and you can type in DD, and it will give you the weekday. And so what you can do now in your pivot table is you can go to the analyze, and you can go to change source data. Just make sure it's got that extra column in, and it has. It's fine, it's automatically picked that up, and then you just refresh. So it's now got the weekday option here as well. So what you can do is you can do weekday there. You need to just go format cells, custom, DD. And then we do, I mean, it becomes more difficult then to do the range and the volume on the same chart, but we'll just do the range just to give you a example of how to do this. and you can see when maybe there might be a day, for example, on inventory day, that it might be that you need to have a specific rule for that day. So what are we going to do here? We're going to just go do the same thing. Interesting, I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, so that's the break. That is the must be some kind of maintenance happen over that period. So let's have a look at it. Rule. Do the same thing again. The midpoint we used before was 0.15, I believe. So we'll just use that. We'll see if there's anything just in terms of the weekday specific. Again, I'm not sure about that on the Friday, but in fact we could just go to design. We'll go grand totals for let's just do that. So we can see that there's pretty much, there's going to be the crude inventory numbers, and that's why we've got a big increase here. That's Wednesday. At 10:30 Eastern time, so that's going to be the massive increase in average range there. That's why it comes up. We can see that actually the lunchtime period for the EU, so when the EU starts to drop off before the US comes in, actually generally speaking it looks a bit lighter on average on a Wednesday than the other days, and that's probably in anticipation for the inventories later on in the US session. People keeping their powder dry, so to speak. Probably, I'd say, you can see the US is going to be the main session though still, even for Brent. And the question is, do you then want to trade crude instead of Brent? It's up to you. You can trade either or both, but they're highly related products, so it's up to you. So we've come to the conclusions of the EU session and the US session, times that we might be looking for, and particularly the start time. I think the start time is really important, but then the stop time as well, like when the market starts to go into a lull, or just really stop quite quickly and abruptly, depending on whether it's the US or the EU session, into lunch before the start of the US session. So 8 AM for the EU session, probably 1:30 PM for the US session start. So we've got some good times there. Now, the thing that you can do, I've not done this, I'm not going to do this right now, but you can do it basically in the same way. What you're looking for is, on your Brent chart, initially you want to see a reasonable number of bars in a session. So you can see the session break lines here. It makes it really easy to see those. Now if I were to change this and put I think the full crude contract is 377. If I were to change that to a 377 tick chart, you can see that there's far fewer bars per session. Now that might happen to be a better setting, a tick setting, but I feel that it's good to have a smaller number, because frequently, there's been more action recently, in fairness, so there's going to be more ticks, more trades that go through. But frequently, you also find sessions where that's not happened. Now, because obviously there's a level of importance on how much geopolitical risk is going on currently, that really impacts upon how much trade goes through in a product like Brent or crude or any of those other energy type products. So you might be able to increase the tick setting on a day like this, but what I'm trying to do is find a reasonable number of ticks per session so that we can really find those trades and have a reasonable number of opportunities in a session. Now, on a 377, I mean, we'll just have a look at yesterday, shall we? So we can see so look, where does that 3 o'clock come in? So I mean, it just comes in there, doesn't it? So that's the start of the EU. And we said that it was until 10:30. So that would be 3 until 5:30. So it's like there. So that's your time window. If you're saying, okay, let's trade from 8 until 10:30, that's your time window that you've got to trade on the EU session, if that's what you're looking at. Now, you might want to extend that a little bit, because you say, okay, well, that's just too short. So, but even so, if we pop back to that pivot table, realistically, it is a bit light after. I mean, maybe you could go to 11. I mean, you might say, okay, well, it's fine, I'll just trade through, but you can see that there's a definite lull here. I mean, look, in fairness, from 10:30 it goes from an average of around 21 ticks down to maybe an average low of 18, 19 ticks. So you might say, well, okay, well, that's still tradable, but all I'm saying is it does drop back a bit then, and maybe it's slightly less reliable. But in terms of if you want to run it until 10:30, maybe 377 is a bit on the low side. So if we look at 233, and this, remember, is for the EU session, so 377 might be fine for the US session. So let's have a look. So the one thing I also need to do is just take that off. So now you can see that there's just that little bit more in terms of number of candlesticks within that window, that time window of the EU session. If it's a market that trades reasonable volume, you'd probably be able to use a tick or a volume chart. You may think, okay, well, a tick chart is absolutely fine, and that's probably the first one that I'd say look at. But then you might say, well, actually, it's how much volume rather than the specific number of ticks that happen, because you could get a 233 tick chart, and that could mean that 233 contracts have traded, or it could mean 10,000 contracts have traded, because each one of those trades was an average of 50 contracts each time. So it's a balance of just finding how many candlesticks happen within the window, the trade window that you're looking at, and you can do that. You can do a similar analysis in Excel but you're going to have to select the time frame each time. So I mean, the other thing is what you can do is you can select the window, create a custom session once you've identified when you want to trade. So if you create a custom session now, you can do that in NinjaTrader or TradeStation pretty easily. You just do session manager, new, and then put the times. So you just put the times for the window that you're going to trade in into that session. Do that, then export the data like that, get it into Excel, and then once you're in Excel, what you can do is, I'll just show you basically as an example here. So you just do a new pivot table. Just thinking of what to do here. So what we've got to do is then we do rows by date, and we just do, I mean, we can do anything. We can do range, and we just do count of range. So what that will then do is it will count the number of times range is present, and if you've got a 233 tick export or a 377 or a 500 volume or whatever, it will count basically the number of bars that are in your window that you've exported in that same date. And that will show you how many bars there are. And you might say, okay, well, it's a little bit on the low side, I want to increase that a little bit, or I want to decrease that, and it's a case of just kind of tweaking it until you're comfortable with what you're getting on a day-to-day basis.